going to try to delineate this idea of spaces or worlds and sort of put a picture in your head that hopefully will connect to your own conceptual world and be of use. Lately, I've been putting things in terms of spaces or worlds, and mostly applying this to noticing and building a good space of love and support and strength for myself, as well as similarly not criticizing and killing sort of every thought that comes into my head, and realizing that that's a counterproductive way of operating. So I guess space and time, I go through phases of thinking mostly about time as like cycles or rhythm as just time, and then sort of times and ages in this, and then space, I suppose, as overlapping spaces or worlds. So if you have a person or like a being or an object slash spiritual object or like thought or concept or something, or like an arrangement of such related objects, around these spaces emerge in which there's a certain feeling and atmosphere, and then like certain things or certain events can be produced or like are will grow, and it conduces to those. And I picture it as sort of maybe like an aura, just like colored shading around whatever is the object in question or the area of the space, or like a little dome or like bubble or something. And I've been playing with being aware of the like resonance or space of each object or presence or like person that is in my attention or thought. You could say as well, like ambience, environment, or biome if you have a nostalgia with Minecraft. This also corresponds to really basically feminine and masculine distinction, the feminine being connected with the space itself, and then the masculine is like whatever is created and like supported in and comes out of that space. Examples of spaces in this very loose concept, be like, like a coffee shop has a general certain, it has a general certain feel, certain things you think about happening in there, and certain typical objects and like elements of the coffee shop that all together have a sort of resonance that produces the coffee shopness. There's a word, not hosts, supports, it emerges from it. Or the space of home, what defines that? And there's a definite feeling of if a place is home or not. Or a website, if you think about the difference between like Reddit and then Tumblr and then like Twitter, or a fictional world, or the Christian idea of the like even the like manifestation of Christ, which is this, when Christ is like appears or is manifest, then it will transform everything into a different kind of space, or bring everything into a different kind of space, because it's this strong thing, which then is being manifested or revealed and sort of like everything is in a different, yeah. Similar, I guess, a connected idea that I think of sometimes is if you have a glass or a certain object and you tap on it and it'll have like a ring, it will have a resonance, and it will sort of make a field of sound, which should also define a kind of space as well. So, yeah. Looking at the world in terms of space, overlapping spaces, and the feel of each space. Especially in that each person has their own personal space, as in the world of our own perspective. And then this is sort of formed by, interact with, is linked to the worlds that we're connected to. So like your family, the ideas and the people's ideas that you're intaking, the environment of your house, the fictional worlds that dwell in your mind, etc. And this is related to the, again, where Jesus says the kingdom of God is within you. Yeah. The idea being to arrange things so that the space that you're projecting is good and is like safe. But an example of using this concept, for instance, like say you have a group of people, if it's a well-constructed group and or if there's like a leader who's really good and has like a strong presence and good spirit about them, that's going to become like a safe space in which you could have good kinds of conversations and talk about like sensitive issues without feeling like you're going to be judged and attacked, versus, and so that will kind of flower from such a space. Whereas if you have a space of like, I don't know, I guess think of a really terrible like Thanksgiving gone wrong type. It's sad that people's general families are so dysfunctional that that's like what we think of, but or just like the internet, like a bad part of the internet, this space of complete dysfunction and irony and attacking, you're not gonna be able to have, there's just not the support and there's not the space for such a good conversation or like honest conversation or healing or anything. It really makes a difference what kind of space you're in. And I think a lot about identifying what can and can't happen in a certain space, or like what is or isn't okay and allowed in that space. So for instance, if somebody says to me, like, it's okay, like say I make a mistake or something, and then they're like, oh, that's fine. And if I accept that, what that's doing is sort of opening up a space where like whatever the thing that I have done is still sustained within I don't know, being like it can live in there too. It's just like a wider acceptance. So yeah, for another example, in a protected space where like I feel loved and supported, there's just a general atmosphere of more warmth. Like say, like a good classroom run by a really good teacher who's just having fun and knows how to connect with the students, and then they're having a casual day of learning, versus some kind of hostile test environment where everybody is just taking this test, and there's like it's just like dead in there, and it's sterile, and you just have to not make any mistakes in this test. Or I guess like a performance or something would be quite a rarefied space where there's no like failure tolerated, versus in a protective space, if you feel loved and supported, failure, it can be more tolerated. Or quote unquote failure, like it has and ironically enough, because I'm an inveterate perfectionist, so I have to spend a lot of effort managing my expectations, and ironically enough, I'm going to get back to this in a bit, but ironically enough, no, paradoxically, that is not the use of, basically the word irony is just used that way at this point, but most of the time, having such a looser environment, instead of making me lazy, actually makes me able to have more energy to gather together and produce something that's actually excellent and good, which is interesting. Another example, like say I am reading a book in a foreign language. I'm currently reading Twilight in Italian. I'm not gonna, never mind. So, I'm like half ironically reading Twilight. I'm half ironically reading it, but also I like the space of the story because it's a nice, I don't know, I'm fond of the characters in the story and the story world and like the space of that. So anyway, there's like, I could be coming at it with the mindset and with like the space of, okay, language learning, and I have to be getting these words and looking them up and going at a good pace, but then it's good also if I have sort of a lower and like wider also space for just having fun in the story and feeling like, okay, there's the language learning, that's good, but then also if I sort of fall from that, then there's also this realm in which I'm doing this just to be reading the story. And this whole, it makes such a difference what kind of a space I'm in. It's interesting. And I've noticed it just being around certain people or in certain places, or thinking about certain things which will create a certain headspace. Another example, usually I will approach things and people with quite a lot of criticism in my head, and like wanting it to be technically good, say if it's a song or a work of fiction. But if I have more openness and like love, and I'm attached to and sort of giving grace to and having a space for a certain, this of course applies mostly with people, but also with like book series and songs, such as the aforementioned Twilight, which books like it, like YA books on its sort of level, other than that, I would tend to like criticize and just pick apart. But I've formed a certain emotional attachment to Twilight, so I'm like, oh, it's okay, like I just tolerate, the errors, or it's fine, it still holds together, because I'm making that space for it to just live and be itself. Twilight is just charming to me. I don't know. It's so innocent in a way. Yeah. So I can like make excuses for it, and it's like it's okay. I suppose it gets into good distinction between goodness and beauty, but I am trying to talk about spaces, not specific, not judging things. It has to do with it, but I have too many notes on this. I'm losing the actual train of thought. Okay. Spaces where failure is tolerated, where the goal is different things, where different things can happen and be okay. Tolerated versus being thrown out. I guess that's also the kingdom of God versus like hell or the outer darkness, and it gets into that too. Another interesting thing is like if you have, it's quite beautiful as far as the power again of being able to do this. If you have like a healthy mind, you can write a story world or like create some sort of work of art and like create an entirely new like fresh good space. It's sort of there. It's very powerful how that can happen. Of course, the thing is to make sure that the author has to start from a good place in themselves, or else what they're going to create, they're going to port their own like darkness, bitterness, and twistedness into the work of art. But if you start from a pure, then it's like a blank page, and it's just interesting because there's a lot of fictional worlds that I find comfort in, and it just feels like a good space and a good place. And it's very beautiful that we can do that. And again, or my own worldview functions in the same way. If I can have beliefs and have perspectives that are beautiful and good, then it really creates a good and like clean space in the world in a real way. Or again, for instance, in certain spaces, something painful happens, and it's just painful, and it's just like bad. Things just sort of fall apart because of that, and it's like, why? You know, the only reaction there is just anger, or like sorrow. But if in a space where there is maybe companionship in that pain or support around it, then that could be turned into like a useful thing or like a funny story, so that pain or tragedy could be redeemed in the right setting and like in the right space. And I guess a lot of the power of good religious narratives is that it gives you it projects a world in which pain and like suffering does have meaning, and there is support for it, and there is spiritual forces to comfort you, etc. So this gives strength to like not just collapse under that. Thomas Merton actually said something about it, not in terms of spaces, but just in terms of, he said back when he had nothing beyond just his own, when he was just in a materialist view, pain and death, they just sort of happened, and he said like you just kind of grit your teeth and took it. There was just nothing else. It was just that. And no wider meaning. Spaces of meaning. Something like that. But in general, it's just noticing how these supporting spaces of love, I guess specifically agape love, if you're going to divide the loves, allow everything emerges and grows from those, and those are sort of implied in everything that is. There's like that space around them. I guess both that they are projecting and also that it's supporting them, allowing them. It's like a mutual thing. I don't know. I guess if you think of like a plant growing out of the soil, but then the plant's roots are also holding together the soil. it's the cycle. For instance, but everything implies this, like, for instance, I was looking at Pinterest, and there was this site somebody had created elaborately about, like, transportation in Roman times, and I was looking at that. If you just look at it for itself, it's like, okay, that's elaborate and weird and kind of exhausting with the amount of effort that people put into all of these little branches of life. Then that site exists because somebody naturally cares enough to want to create such a thing and, like, loves that site enough and wants it to exist, and, like, they are supporting it. A lot of this connects to the concepts from that one video on Is There Something Wrong with the Universe? Yeah, or just all of the, I think about this mostly with people, I guess, that I say, oh, what a healthy, beautiful, put together person, and then I'm like, yeah, because they're living in such and such a world, and sustaining that, and also, I mean, it's a, again, mutual thing. We have to see the implications behind, or of course, if you see somebody who just seems to has no dignity and, like, just nothing, they also don't have the environment. Just a lot of the weird random things that exist in the world. It's or like any story. Those things gain extra resonance, I think, from feeling that they emerge out of, that somebody wanted that to exist and loved that enough that and was the kind of person who would bring that into existence. I was looking up the game of life, as in with the little cells and that have simple rules and they move around and become more complicated. There's a whole little world for that. Speaking of spaces, there's a whole little community for that, and not even that little. And they have these names for everything. It's just this whole elaborated thing. It's so great. But such an environment of support, love, acceptance, desire, etc. is necessary for anything to live and be created at all, which helps me to realize that when the things that I'm trying to, like, create, which right now is just things in me, like hobbies and projects and such that I'm working on, but if I approach those things with this constant hostility and critique, and, like, I may be doing it to try to make them be better, but it's like there's like nothing there. There's just like this tiny little sprout there, and I'm just cutting at that. I'm like, and it's like, that's nothing good's gonna come from that. The thing is, this not even gonna survive at all. There's gonna be nothing left. Which it helps me to see that when I think in these terms of what space does that say. Learning a language, or working on this story, or, like, drawing, or getting more in shape. What does that need in order to emerge? And while it needs to be an environment where it can actually grow, it's like in a hostile enough and critical enough environment, nothing at all can emerge. Think of like a desert. Of course, there are the clever and strong little things that do live in the desert, but think of it or like, I don't know, just that sort of spirit of constant critique with nothing to balance it out. It really does. It like kills everything and takes the worth out of everything, versus the kind of love that would say, yes, this site about Roman transportation in Roman times needs to exist, and I'm going to make this so beautiful and accurate and, like, put all of the work into it. But if it's too much critique, it's like dropping some little thing into... Nothing can nothing can just survive in any environment. I don't know. And just because a thing needs a certain environment in order to be able to survive does not make it useless. Sometimes my attitude toward aspects of myself or things that I'm trying to develop is similar to somebody having the attitude toward a human being, like, oh, okay, there's this human. But what if I, like, put you in a desert for 5 days without water? You'll just, like, die. Or, like, what if I put you in the middle of a fire? You'll just, like, die. What a weak and pathetic creature. It's obviously not worth being alive, because it just is so weak and dependent. It's like, yeah. So, it is important, in order to live, move, and have my being, to cultivate good spaces, or, like, in 2022 terms, safe spaces, in symbolic terms, sacred space. Some overlap between those concepts. How is this done? I think about it like if there's little pieces of light scattered everywhere, and maybe this is a certain person's influence or a certain story world, say, that I love, or if those were all like little bits of light, just collecting those, and again, just noticing threads in my attention. Are they like good, or are they those destroying and negative ones? And where is my attention, and what am I sort of collecting in order to build the space in which I am living? And which spaces am I living in? Where are these coming from, and are they good and bad? And noticing how that is affecting me, rather than just pinning all of the blame on, like, Alex Magos, there are no conditions, only weakness type of attitude. It's not always helpful. So taking any little bit of light that I can, good memories, associations, or things that I associate with people, or actual people, except I'm still living my life of mostly solitary contemplation, so things that I associate with people with whom I am occasionally in contact, or like a song that makes me happy, just collecting all these things and opening up to and then building this good space. And especially that ever more solid sense of the divine love and like that voice in the world and in me is a big part of it. And arranging all this to make that a like safe and good space where I can live and be myself and be supported, instead of feeling like I'm living in just a hostel that is just a sandstorm and like eroding everything before I can even live and do anything. Or even on a smaller scale, just if I need to work or get something done, I'll think about it in terms of, okay, how do we set up a space where this can happen? Both in terms of physical space, like where should I be, then also what, like, okay, I'm gonna listen to this music or podcast or have this amount of energy, and sort of in order so that there can be the support for focusing so that the task will be produced. In short, the cosmos is made up of overlapping spaces. And we can choose and create these spaces to a very powerful degree.